Welcome back to Bridge Academy, where we learn science interactively. In this video, we are going to learn about the structure of the cell membrane and its different components and how they work together. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more updates. So, if you're ready, let's get started. We know that cells are the basic building blocks of living organisms. A bacteria or a human being is made up of cells. And just like each one of you is unique, each type of cell is unique as well. However, there are some common features among all the cells. One of those features is the presence of a cell membrane. A cell membrane is present in both plant cells and animal cells. Every single cell has a cell membrane. We know that cells are the basic building blocks of living organisms. The cell membrane is a structure that surrounds all cells. It acts like a gatekeeper, controlling what goes into and out of the cell. The main function of the cell membrane is to maintain homeostasis, which means that it keeps the internal conditions of the cell stable and balanced. The cell membrane is made up of a thin, flexible layer called the phospholipid bilayer. The phospholipid bilayer is made up of two layers of molecules called phospholipids. Each phospholipid has a head and two tails. The head of the phospholipid is hydrophilic, which means that it attracts water. On the other hand, the tails of the phospholipid are hydrophobic, which means that they repel water. When phospholipids are in a watery environment, like the fluids inside and outside the cell, they naturally form a bilayer with their tails facing inward and their heads facing outward. This arrangement forms a barrier between the inside and outside of the cell. And because the tails are hydrophobic, they do not interact with water. This structure makes the membrane selectively permeable, which means that it allows only certain substances to pass through it. This selectivity is important because it helps the cell maintain homeostasis by controlling what goes into and out of the cell. But the cell membrane is not just made up of phospholipids. It also contains other components such as proteins and cholesterol. Proteins are large molecules that perform a variety of functions in the body. There are many different types of proteins in the cell membrane, but they can be divided into two main categories based on their location and function. The first category is integral proteins. Integral proteins are embedded within the phospholipid bilayer. This means that they are in direct contact with both the inside and outside of the cell. Integral proteins often span the entire width of the membrane, creating channels or carriers that allow molecules to pass through. These proteins are responsible for many of the transport functions of the cell membrane. For example, some integral proteins act as channels, allowing water or ions to pass through the membrane. Other integral proteins act as carriers, binding to specific molecules and transporting them across the membrane. An example of a carrier protein is the sodium-potassium pump, which transports sodium and potassium ions across the membrane. This is important for maintaining the electrical charge of the cell and for nerve impulse transmission. The second category of proteins is peripheral proteins. Peripheral proteins are located on the surface of the cell membrane, either on the inside or outside of the cell. Unlike integral proteins, peripheral proteins are not embedded in the phospholipid bilayer. Instead, they are attached to either the integral proteins or the cytoskeleton, which is a network of fibers that provides support and structure to the cell. Peripheral proteins often play a role in cell signaling and communication. For example, some peripheral proteins act as receptors, binding to hormones or other signaling molecules and triggering a response in the cell. Other peripheral proteins are involved in cell adhesion, helping cells attach to other cells or to the extracellular matrix, which is a network of proteins and carbohydrates that surround cells. Another important component of the cell membrane is cholesterol. Cholesterol is a type of lipid, or fat molecule, that is found in all cell membranes. Similar to proteins, cholesterol has various roles in the body, and one of its primary roles is to help maintain the structure and function of the cell membrane. The amount of cholesterol in the cell membrane varies depending on the type of cell and the organism. However, generally, cholesterol makes up about 20% of the mass of the cell membrane. So, how does cholesterol work in the cell membrane? Well, it turns out that the fluidity, or ability to move and flow, of the cell membrane is affected by temperature. At higher temperatures, the phospholipids in the membrane move more rapidly, which can make the membrane more fluid. However, this increased fluidity can make the membrane unstable and can lead to the cell bursting. On the other hand, at lower temperatures, the phospholipids move more slowly, which can make the membrane more rigid. This decreased fluidity can make it difficult for molecules to move in and out of the cell, which can disrupt important processes like transport. Cholesterol helps counteract these effects by providing stability to the cell membrane. At higher temperatures, cholesterol molecules bind to the phospholipids, which helps to restrict their movement and prevent the membrane from becoming too fluid. At lower temperatures, cholesterol molecules also bind to phospholipids, but they also help maintain the spacing between the phospholipid tails, which prevents them from packing too tightly and makes the membrane more fluid. By providing this stability, cholesterol helps ensure that the cell membrane can function properly over a range of temperatures. In addition to regulating fluidity, cholesterol also provides structural support to the cell membrane. Cholesterol molecules are embedded in the phospholipid bilayer, and their rigid structure helps to reinforce the membrane and prevent it from rupturing. This is particularly important for cells that are exposed to mechanical stress, such as those in the skin and digestive system. Overall, cholesterol is an essential component of the cell membrane that plays a critical role in maintaining its structure and function. Without cholesterol, the cell membrane would be more susceptible to damage and may not be able to regulate the passage of molecules in and out of the cell effectively. To sum everything up, the cell membrane is like the protective shield of the cell, separating the inside of the cell from the outside world. It is made up of a phospholipid bilayer that acts as a barrier and is embedded with proteins and cholesterol that help regulate what goes in and out of the cell. These components work together to keep the cell alive and functioning properly, but it's not just a passive barrier. The cell membrane is full of activity, with proteins acting as channels and pumps to transport molecules and cholesterol helping to stabilize the membrane so it can do its job effectively. If you want to delve deeper into the fascinating world of science, then you should check out our other videos. We have a ton of awesome stuff there that I think you'll really enjoy. And if you like what you see, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more updates. Review questions and answers. Question 1. What is the main role of channel proteins in the cell membrane? Answer. Channel proteins form tunnels in the cell membrane for passive transport. They allow small molecules, like water or ions, to move across the membrane without using energy. Question 2. How do pump proteins differ from channel proteins in their function? Answer. Pump proteins use energy ATP to move substances against their concentration gradient from low to high concentration. Channel proteins allow substances to move passively without energy. Question 3. What is the function of cholesterol in the cell membrane? Answer. Cholesterol keeps the cell membrane flexible and strong. It prevents the membrane from becoming too fluid at high temperatures or too rigid at low temperatures. Question. For what role do peripheral proteins play in the cell membrane? Answer. Peripheral proteins support the membrane's structure by linking to the cytoskeleton. They also help with cell signaling and adhesion, connecting cells to form tissues. Question 5. How does the cell membrane's selective permeability work with its proteins and cholesterol? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.